Hi, I'm Stephen Hawley Martin. Recently, a friend of mine's 15-year-old daughter took her own life. If you have children, you know that is a parent's worst nightmare. Unfortunately, it's not uncommon. A total of 4 people I know have had children, teenage children, commit suicide in the past few years. This recent suicide caused me to realize that I have information that may prevent tragedies such as this. Let me tell you how. Some years ago, I hosted a talk radio show called The Truth About Life. The premise of the show was that there is much more to reality and to life than meets the eye. I interviewed near-death survivors, psychiatrists, metaphysicians, quantum physicists, and paranormal researchers. One person I interviewed was an old friend of mine who, at the age of 16, was wishing he had never been born. No doubt that's how the teenage children of those friends of mine who took their own lives started out on a journey that led to their demise. If those young people had known what happened to my friend, I doubt seriously they would have taken that path. I recapped that interview and other important information on how to turn depression and sadness into happiness and a fulfilling life in a book I wrote called You Can Be Happy, No Joke. You can get it on Amazon, but first, I found that interview in my archives and I'm going to play it for you right now. I'm speaking with a friend of mine, Taliesin St. Clair, who is perhaps one of the most knowledgeable people I know when it comes to what might be called esoteric knowledge, particularly of things spiritual. Tally is a lawyer in his day job. In fact, he's the managing partner of a law firm, but his avocation is the spiritual realm and how human beings fit into the scheme of the universe. He has just told me that as a 16-year-old, he was going through a rough time. He'd had a difficult childhood. His mother, for example, was a paranoid schizophrenic, almost impossible to live with. His home life was one disruption after another, and he had fallen in love with his best friend's girlfriend. Now, he didn't want to upset his best friend, obviously, and his best friend at that particular time happened to be spending the night with him in his bedroom at his home and a bed just across the way. It was 3:30 in the morning. Tally was lying in bed wishing he had never been born, wide awake, wishing that he no longer existed, that his existence would end, when a sort of tornado swooped down and pulled him out of his body. And in a few seconds he found himself high above the earth, looking down. So tell me, Tally, what happened then? What was it like?
I could see the whole earth. I could see the curvature of the earth. I could only look down and see where I'd come from. I could see the East Coast and the lights and so forth along the coast of cities, and I could look out over the Atlantic and see the demarcation of daylight, coming from the east, and the stars were, and the firmament of the sky was just unbelievable.
I imagine it was really loaded with stars up there.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I did not ever. I'd never seen anything like that before. It happened so fast from where I had started to that point that I didn't have time to reflect on it, or whether this was a dangerous undertaking or something that one should be slightly frightened of or anything like that. But that thought did cross my mind once the movement stopped, and you
didn't have a body though.
Exactly, and that's exactly what was the immediate response to the question of should I be afraid. The immediate answer was, what's there to be afraid of? I don't have a body. I don't know exactly how I'm here, or what it is of me that is here, except that I seem to be able to see without eyes and so forth, and so there's no reason to have any sense of fear. And within a few seconds, and probably it was less than that, there was a slight pop. It was sort of resembled the slight pop that one hears if one is in a quiet room and a bubble comes up through a beer bottle, through a long neck beer bottle, and pops out of the top. If you can hear that pop, this is about the level of perturbation that I was aware of when this occurred. And with this slight pop, which carried with it the sense that it was coming from the crown of my head, which I didn't have.
Right.
And when that occurred, the earth disappeared, the sky disappeared, all the array of planets and stars and the sun and the whole sky disappeared. Everything was gone. All reference points vanished in that moment. There was, at the spot where I thought, with which I associated my location, there was a faint glimmer of flickering light.
And that was your own body?
That's what I thought was not my body, but some sort of consciousness essence or spiritual essence or something. And it was sort of like a dotted line in which the dots would flicker almost, and I thought, well, this is some electrical trail or something or other that's associated with me or my consciousness, and if this is what represents me as a disembodied being with consciousness, perhaps there are others in this space that I can see or find out.
This all occurred to you here in a few seconds or so?
I would say a few seconds. Could have been a minute. I then saw in what seemed to be the distance other little flickers of light that I wondered which caused me to wonder whether they were also discarnate or disembodied conscious beings of some sort. And I saw what seemed to be a number of these, and within this framework, I then asked the question, is anybody there?
I see. And did anybody answer?
And I asked the question, as far as I was concerned, I was vocalizing it.
Yeah, I was going to say, how do you do that when you don't have a body?
Well, this had, despite that I had been fully awake when this occurred, I must say it had very much of a dreamlike quality about it. And so, as far as I was concerned, I was vocalizing it to whatever extent one can do that without having a body through which to do it.
Did anyone answer?
Immediately, yes. And these seemingly from the direction of which I was seeing these other dotted little strings of light, came an answer, and the answer was yes. And as that occurred, a group of these suddenly moved to surround me, and I don't know how many there were, but the sense was of about 3 dozen or so, 35 to 40, and it was not possible to discern numbers from any vocalizations, because in the dialogue which ensued, they all, from my perspective, seemed to speak with a single voice.
Mm-hmm. So this whole group was talking to you, but it was coming out. It was just one
voice.
one voice coming to you.
Right. Quadraphonic.
Right. And what did they say?
Surround sound, let's put it that way.
What did they say?
Well, they said yes, and as soon as they said that, they came from a great distance, or at least from a point where their light was faintly seen, to a point where they seemed to be immediately in my presence. What happened was they came there, and as they arrived, a dialogue ensued between us where I asked them a number of questions, and they gave me a number of responses.
Can you recall the questions and the responses?
Yeah, I recall it fairly vividly. I made later on, not that day, but not long thereafter, I made some fairly copious notes about it, and have since then written it up. But basically, what I first said was, "Where am I?"
Right.
And they answered, and this kind of answer has, I've had many dialogues with these folks since then, and this kind of cryptic answer has been characteristic of many of the communications.
You've had dialogues with these same folks, or with other?
Well, as far as I know, the same folks. But in any event, I said,
does this happen periodically, or
not this kind of experience that I'm talking about, but
you have conversations.
Right.
I don't want to get off the subject too much because I want to hear what they say. But how does that happen? These conversations that you have.
Well, in any number of ways. Yeah, I've had other out-of-body experiences where there have been communications, but
Right.
there have been any number of other ways, which we can get into, later on if you want.
Okay. Well, but let's find out what these.
But in any event, I said, my first question was, where am I? And the answer came back, the exact words were, "You are in a place that is no place. No place." And I said, "Well, what does that mean?" And they said, "That means that you are in a locale which is outside of space and time as you know it." Completely
So you're no
separate.
longer in the physical realm.
That's, well,
Would that be?
I suppose, but that's not what they said.
Right.
They said you're outside of space and time, whatever that meant. And
Okay.
and
And then what did they say? Did you ask
and then
something?
I said, well, that's very interesting, I guess. Bear in mind, I'm 16 years old at this point, so it's not like I had a whole lot of, I didn't have a knowledge base of what the heck they were talking about with any of this stuff. I said, well, what am I doing here? And they said, well, we brought you here because we have some very important things to tell you, to share with you. And I said, oh, okay, well, who are you? And they said, well, we are your guides. Now this, again, as I just mentioned, this was interesting to me, but I had no idea what it meant at the time.
Right.
And I said, well, what's that? What are guides? And conversation that ensued after that, I said, well, my first question, of course, when they said, well, we're your guides, and I said, and I don't recall using any profane words, but my first thought was, what the hell is that? But I said, well, what are guides, as I recall, and because I'd never even heard of such a thing before, and they gave a very, very beautiful explanation of that, and after first giving me a very cryptic response, and the cryptic response, the first statement was, you can think of us as that which is both you and not you. And I said, me and not me?
That's sort of like the sound of one hand clapping.
Right, exactly. I mean, and I said, well, I guess that's something I'll have to think about it because I have no idea what you're talking about. And I said, is there any, well, if you're not going to really give me an explanation I can currently understand about what guides are, can you tell me what guides do? And so they gave me this explanation about guides and about how people all have guides, and that they are, and that guides are souls who sign on to facilitate the development of those of us who are embodied, and it was quite a very, very beautiful thing they described, and very, very comforting, not without even having any background in what the heck it all meant.
Well, did they give you any advice about your current situation with
Oh yeah,
your friend? And
oh yeah, they did. And I said, well, what after we got through identifying something about who they were and what they were about, I said, well, what is it? What was the important message you brought me here to tell me? And they said, well, the message is your life is your own. It
Okay.
belongs to you.
Okay.
And I registered the same response that you just did. So,
Yeah.
who else would it belong to?
Right, right.
And they said, well, what we mean by that is, and this is where they started getting to more of the meat of the discussion, they said, what we mean by that is that you are free to do anything with it you want, or to do nothing with it at all, or anything in between. You can be whatever you want, you can do whatever you want, you can say whatever you want, you can think and feel whatever you want, and whatever you do or don't do with it is perfectly okay. It is yours to do with it as you will or as you won't, and you don't have to worry about any decisions you make or any judgments anybody else would make about your decisions or actions anytime at all, because
Wow.
it is exclusively yours to do whatever you will with. And then they went on to say, and I said, well, that sounds good. It really didn't, well, it's my first thought as I'm sitting here now, almost 50 years later, that at 16 one acts like that because you're an adolescent and you're rebelling against the constraints
Sure.
of family and so forth. But even at 64, one is still responding to all kinds of things that are far more constraining than the kind of open-ended definition that was allowed in that communication. And they went on to say, and this was really the heart of the matter, they said, even if you should decide to self-destruct, they didn't use the term suicide, but even if you should decide to self-destruct, to try to terminate your life because you don't like it, because it's unpleasant, or whatever, for whatever other reason, that's perfectly okay. If you've been taught in school and in church and in family that this is some kind of a sin, forget it. It doesn't. That's an illusion. None of that is the way things really are.
But there must be some consequence from doing that, isn't
Oh yeah, they didn't say there weren't consequences.
there? Are you
They
getting
just
to that?
no. And but as soon as they start on this path, I started, of course, getting on the defensive. I said, wait a minute, I wasn't thinking of self-destructing or killing myself or anything like that, and I mean, I saw where they were going at that point.
So what
They
happened?
said they said, well, you were not at that point yet in the turmoil you were going through this particular night, but if the thoughts you were having of wishing that you didn't exist were followed to their conclusion, if we had not intervened and these thoughts had continued you would have gotten to that point, and eventually in other situations, because you may actually reach that point. And we're here to tell you that that's okay if you should make that choice. They say, and then the punchline is, they say it's perfectly okay. You won't be judged. You won't go to hell, and all these things that you're told are not true. But they did say it is the choice. That choice is, in a way, a waste of time. It's not without consequences because it does waste time.
Well,
And
how does that work? You got to come back and do it over again until
exactly. And when they threw out the words waste of time, that was something that as a 16-year-old I had an appreciation for, much more so than all the other stuff they were telling me. And I said, "Oh, waste of time? What does that mean?" And then they gave me this explanation, which was in summary form of the way life and evolution works, in a sense.
How does it?
They said that they talked to an extent about the how shall I say, the infinite wisdom and patience of the Creator and of our infinite connection with the creative force, and the fact that we have infinite time in which to evolve, and of the fact that we go through an infinite number of lifetime experiences and lifetimes, or potentially infinite number, and that we, for the most part, actually choose the lifetimes we experience, and they went on to say that there is one thing that they said, one thing that's completely erroneous about your outlook as being experienced tonight before we brought you here is the idea that you could cease to exist. They said that is the one thing that you can yes, you can terminate a life, you can commit suicide. You cannot, however, cease to exist. They said there is only life, and the physical component of that through a given lifetime is only a tiny flicker of the life experience, which is itself eternal, and that you will not in any sense terminate your life by terminating the life you experience in a physical body. You'll terminate a lifetime, but not the life that gives life to that lifetime.
And so those issues you're dealing with wouldn't really go away.
Exactly. And they said when you choose a life to incarnate into, to be born into, you choose it for the experiences you will encounter there, the lessons you might learn there, all kinds of reasons, but that the issues that you encounter within that lifetime are ones you've chosen to encounter and to assimilate, integrate, or whatever, and that you will not ever be able to go on to the next lesson plan or whatever until you have completed the one that you've started on now. And so if you decide that the experience is just so difficult or so boring or so whatever else that you just can't abide it anymore, and you decide to check out early, which is your absolute right and privilege to do, then the consequence of that is, or the effect of that choice, is that you have the opportunity, as afforded you by the infinite patience of the Creator, to go back and relive that encounter or that array of experiences in another lifetime, or as many lifetimes as it takes to get to allow that to go on and to its natural conclusion. And they explained that the lessons you choose for a lifetime can only be fully assimilated and integrated in a lifetime, no matter how long or short it may be, if it is allowed to go to its natural conclusion.
So it's that movie Groundhog Day, where the guy. Have you ever seen that movie?
Yeah, years ago.
Where the guy goes to
And
Pawtucket,
relives
Pennsylvania, and
it's
he
over
lives
and
that
over.
same day over and over again until he finally gets it right.
Right.
Is that kind of
It's sort of like that. It's exactly.
So the moral of the story is to try to get it right this time, so you can move on to other.
Well, when they told me that, I said, well, gee, that does sound like a waste of time. I said, as bad as what I feel like I'm going through is, I don't want to have to do it again.
Well, then how did you get back into your body?
Well, what happened was, after we had a little more dialogue, in which I would have liked to have continued for many hours, they said, well, we have essentially told you what we brought you here for, and you can communicate with us anytime you want, but now this is enough for you to absorb for this occasion, and so it's time to send you back. And they said, and by the way, if you can make it, this was Sunday morning, Saturday night, Sunday morning, 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. They said, if you can make it till Monday, the crisis that's been
playing on
your mind for the last several months is going to completely go away.
And did it?
And I said, well, how could that be? And they said, well, just wait and see. And so with that, we said goodbyes, and then suddenly there was another pop, like the pop from the top of a beer bottle, and I was back in space at exactly the same place I had been before all reference points disappeared. And I hung there for another moment to enjoy the view, and then suddenly was sent back on exactly the same arc that I had exited on. And the only thing, as I was coming down and getting close to the city, if you will, coming down from the lighted sky and into the darkness of the neighborhood, I had a sense of doppelganger, where I could see myself coming down, but I also had a consciousness within my body in the same sense that one has in a falling dream, and within the solar plexus of a sense of falling. But it was the only time in my life that I ever had that, up to then, that I ever had that experience, that I had no sense of anxiety associated with it, because I knew that I was falling back into my own body.
Wow.
And Bob Monroe says that those falling dreams are almost always evidence of at least some temporary leaving of the body and a return.
Monday, did it resolve itself?
That Monday, I started a new job, and in the afternoon, I was working at a club, and in the afternoon, the lifeguard, who was a friend of mine, said that he knew a couple of girls in the locality. He wondered if I would want to participate in a blind date if he could line them. I said, fine. I didn't even give it a thought. I didn't even associate it with the previous events of Saturday. Well, about 6 o'clock that Monday night, went to pick up my blind date. I fell head over heels in love and never gave another thought. I was with that girl for the next 3.5 years, never gave another thought at all to the crisis of that had so riveted me for the previous 3 or 4 months.
Well, that's amazing. We've been speaking with Taliesin St. Clair, who's a lawyer and a managing partner of a law firm, but does a lot of research and investigation into the paranormal spirit world. Thanks so much for being with us.
It's been a pleasure.